I'll go ahead and take a seat. So our pianist and organist this morning is Mr. Miner. He is the organist as well as choir director at First UMC, and it's been a real pleasure to have him today, and we thank you for being here and worshiping with us. Jackie had surgery about a week and a half ago, and we look forward to her being back here in a week or so, but we're very grateful for Mr. Miner in the meantime. Okay, so this month we began, well, it's not really, I guess, a calendar month, but for 4 weeks or so, starting last week, we are talking about the concept of a house undivided. Now, that might call to your mind the quote from Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew, where Jesus said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." Or maybe you remember the fact that Abraham Lincoln said that in a famous speech of his. Of course, the Bible is the best book to plagiarize from. And today, we're going to be talking about what is the baseline for a group like that, one that can stay undivided. Whether it's a company or a family or a country or a church, what is the foundation or the baseline that keeps a group like that indivisible? And that's kind of what we're going to focus on today. In fact, we're going to be turning once again to the book of 1 Corinthians. Let's go ahead and find that together. You should find a Bible and a chair around you, perhaps. Maybe you brought one from home. I used to love doing that because then I would mark it up with notes and all kinds of things. Or you can pull it up on an app on your phone. We're going to be in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, beginning with verse 18. Here you go. "For the message about the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, 'I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the discernment of the discerning I will thwart.' Where is the one who is wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God the world did not know God through wisdom, God decided through the foolishness of our proclamation to save those who believe. For Jews demand signs and Greeks desire wisdom, but we proclaim Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles, but to those who are the called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. For God's foolishness is wiser than human wisdom, and God's weakness is stronger than human strength. Consider your own call, brothers and sisters. Not many of you were wise by human standards. Not many of you were powerful. Not many of you were of noble birth. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, things that are of nothing, to reduce to nothing things that are, so that no one might boast in the presence of God. He is the source of your life in Christ Jesus, who became for us wisdom from God and righteousness and sanctification and redemption, in order that, as it is written, let the one who boasts, boast in the Lord." This is the word of God for the people of God. You know, I still remember the time when I was in about 6th grade when I was making a batch of cookies at the Phelps house, and I looked at the recipe and measured the amount of sugar I was supposed to be putting in it, and yet I accidentally used that measurement for the salt. Those cookies were delicious. I mean, completely inedible. I also have this tendency, I like to do things really fast, and I always over-exaggerate how talented I am. And so whenever I'm hanging a new picture on the wall, you know those pictures that have like the two thingamajiggies that you have to have two instead of one in the middle? I always think that I can just eyeball that without any kind of measurement. And what usually ends up happening is you are never allowed to move pictures off my walls, okay? Because what you would find is like a nest of 5 or 6 holes as I try to just, because I think that that's better somehow. I don't know why I do that. There are times when measuring correctly is really, really important. But we, as humans, we tend to be in the habit of measuring in some really unhelpful ways. And Sonny's going to help me bring this whiteboard over here real quick. He volunteered to be my Vanna White today. You want to give him a hand? Okay, so thank you. Here, let's do it a little so these folks over here can see as well. Thank you. Okay, so let's say, now my husband is the scientist, the mathematician of the family, but I was hanging out with some pastor friends on Monday. We had a training we have to go to every once in a while, and it reminded me that every once in a while, pastors have a tendency to measure themselves up according to like how big of a church they serve, right? And so, because like clearly church size is synonymous with how awesome the pastor is. So some of us were here, and then a few folks were, and then there's this guy over here, and wow, them, and you know what I'm saying? Like, as you're walking around the room, some people have a tendency to like measure each other up according to this kind of thing. Or how about this one? That's the kind of work I do, but you're in different kinds of workplaces. So I'm sure that you've seen a similar thing as well. Now, for those who are in the back, this says work chops and not pork chops. But you know, like every once in a while there's the boss, right? And then here's this person down here, and then this person's kind of a mid-level person, or like you have people who are peers, but you're measuring up each other according to like who's trusted with the bigger project, right? Or who hasn't been there very long. And we do this. I mean, I'm sure you've seen it, that people tend to measure each other up, and they measure themselves against other people. Have you seen that happen before? One of the places that I see this get really destructive is in families. Part of the reason people don't want to get together for Thanksgiving or whatever is that they do this within the family. And they say, well, this person, never got a job that made him a whole lot of money, but then this person over here, we always go to his house because it's bigger, and this person is embarrassed of this person, and this person's embarrassed of this person, or we say, okay, well, I might not have made a whole lot of money, but my kids turned out really well, and theirs, not so much. And we do this in our families. And it's those kinds of dynamics that we create that can make those gatherings kind of unpleasant. And it gets really dangerous. From the outside, people could do that with with the friends that I made in college. There was a group of us who met in that first couple of months of school, and if you looked at us today, you could map us on a graph like this if you wanted to. Like one of my friends, SpaceX is doing this satellite program where they're hoping to provide internet to the whole world, like, out in the middle of nowhere through satellites. My friend Matt runs that, so he's doing pretty good. I have another good friend who's a preschool teacher. Okay, maybe not quite the same level, if you want to talk about it that way. Another friend became an English professor at TSU, or Texas State. That's what that is, right? It used to be Southwestern, or I get confused. Yes. Then my friend Andrew, his company sent him over to Amsterdam. He lives there for a while. Another friend got divorced and ended up living in another friend's basement for a few years. We have, and you could do that. My friend Laura is a missionary in Morocco. And if you wanted to, you could map us like this. But the thing is, when we get together, none of us do that at all. Because we remember when SpaceX friend dressed so poorly, we had to take him to the store and teach him how to dress like he was in college. And my friend who worked at Oxford University and now works for the Oxfam nonprofit, we remember the first time that she made spaghetti and it all stuck together, and you put that fork in the pot and the whole thing came out on the fork. And my friend in Amsterdam, we remember the time when brilliantly he decided to go on a hike the day that he landed from a flight into Denver. And you know about the whole altitude sickness thing. And he was on a pretty significant hike, and he tooted. And it was so smelly, it made him throw up because he was already almost altitude sick. My point is, like, when we get together, we remember all of that. And you might as well, to us, if you were going to, thank you, Pinky. If we were going to map it out, we would map it out like this. And the reason for that is because we had relationships with each other long before any of us had any accomplishments or any lack of accomplishments. The relationship came first for all of us. And so this kind of stuff makes no difference to us. When we get together, we just remember, how it used to be, and we are all on the same level together. And I don't know if y'all know this, but some people measure folks when it comes to spirituality and faith. And by the way, the ones who do that usually start with themselves. In other words, if you think people are measuring you up, it's probably because you are measuring yourself up, and you need to spend some time doing the work of getting to know yourself the way that God knows you, and not worrying so much about how you measure up with others. But in Corinth, this church, they did the same thing. They measured people up according to spirituality and faith all the time. In fact, we see it come up in chapter 11 pretty significantly, because you had people who had status and wealth, and you had others who didn't. And if you want to go take a look at how that goes in chapter 11, not good, because the wealthy ones have a lot of money, so they can bring really nice things to the potlucks at church. I'm not kidding you. This is what this is about. And then the poor folk who really needed a decent meal, they were having to come to the table last, because the rich folk were like, hey, if I bring the good food, I'm eating the good food. And you've been there. But they had this thing about status and wealth in that church that Paul is trying to break down. Today, some people are tempted to measure themselves according to what they give to the church, or maybe how often they serve at the church, or how comfortable they are worshiping demonstratively in front of others. In case you need a guide to that, I can help. Oh, this is a picture of my old friends. Okay, so yes, if you see at the top level, those kind of like the early level of learning how to worship demonstratively, you start out like this. And then if you really become a pro, you start worshiping like this. And then you get to the expert level at the bottom, and you get the village people pose in worship, or the Rocky pose, which is this one in the middle there. Okay, people sometimes feel this kind of stuff. It's ridiculous, but we do this. We measure ourselves and other people. And here's one that's really heated up recently. how Christian your position on a social issue is. I don't want to sit next to them in the pews. I saw their social media post this week. I don't want to associate with them. Or I've heard that here, friends. Or I can no longer be associated with that denomination or that congregation because I don't 100% agree with all of their positions. Can you name for me a single church in which you agree 100% with every single position? Because I can't, and I'm a pastor in one of them. And here's what I think Paul is trying to say to all of that. You are foolishly wasting your time on a social ruler, trying to decide how everybody else measures up. And he'd say, you know what? Rome does that. The Romans do that. The Greeks did that too. Even the Jews were engaged in that kind of social ruler measuring up with the Pharisees and the Sadducees and then the common people. They did that. It made sense, actually, because it was a method of social sorting. It kind of helped everybody understand everybody's place. But Paul argues here that we Christians, we don't do that. We're not supposed to do that. That as Christians, actually, this doesn't make any sense at all. Would you mind helping me, Sonny, put this on the floor in front of the altar? And the reason that it makes no sense as Christians is because of the cross. The cross. The cross reversed what seemed wise and what seemed foolish. And the cross back then was foolish. The cross was crazy. Today, for many people, the meaning of the cross is like the jewelry we wear or the wall decor that we have up in our office or home, as do I. But for them, back then, the cross was not something that you were proud of. It wasn't cute or decorative. The cross was to them like the electric chair would be to us, or the gas chamber, the worst possible way a person could die, saved for the most inhumane of circumstances. You're going to wear that on your necklace? I don't think so. And it was, in fact, the number one stumbling block to the good news. You have people over here who worship Roman gods, who live in magnificent temples, and they have these fantastic tales of magical powers, and you want us to worship a homeless criminal who died on a tree? It sounded absolutely absurd. You want to chart that? It falls off the board, right? The cross was foolish. It was a terrible thing evangelistically that they had to overcome, but you and I, we know different. You and I know that the cross has literally saved our lives. You and I know that if we were going to measure up our own accomplishments and, what we had done that everybody else should be really impressed by, if we were going to chart that in comparison to the significance and power of the cross, that it would hardly even register. That's nothing in comparison to the work that Jesus Christ did on the cross for each one of us. It doesn't even, it might as well just be on the ground. It means nothing in comparison to this. You and I know that. And I'm going to put this over here so it's not in our way. So the cross isn't in our way. You and I know that in comparison to anything you and I have ever accomplished, all the ways we measure ourselves against other people, that's not even a blimp. It is totally inconsequential. It might as well be flat. Our accomplishments might be good. I'm not saying that they're not. And they are worth feeling good about. But are they really all that much to brag about in comparison to the cross? And you and I think we would all say, no, they're not. Which is why Paul says in this passage we just read, if you're going to boast, boast in the Lord. You remember that? And if it's only about how we measure our actions, our accomplishments, that's one thing. That is part of it. But it's also about each one of our own brand of wisdom. You and I know that in all of our attempts to measure who got it right and whether our differences are too great for us to be able to stay in it together, the height and depth of God's wisdom washes all of ours out. You and I know that the foundation of our house is our relationship with Christ. And in the face of the power and life-changing transformation of the cross, the lengths to which Christ was willing to go to be in relationship with us, our own differences of belief or interpretation or opinion, once again, barely even register in comparison. The differences that in the moment seem so significant to us and important to us are revealed to be completely inconsequential in comparison to the work and wisdom and power of God. And so once we have been properly flattened, put in our place, if you will, gloriously flattened, a better Bible word for that would be humbled, then like Jesus arose from the cross, we all together rise through the cross in the strength of God's love for us. A big question along the way is, can we stop measuring ourselves? Can we stop measuring others? Done with this. Thank you so much. So a few weeks back, I got to go to the largest gang intervention ministry program, whether it's religious or not, in the world. It's run by this man, Father Greg Boyle. He is a Jesuit priest who is assigned to the poorest church in LA that was right in the epicenter of 8 gangs whenever he arrived in the 80s. It has grown today to being, like I mentioned, they bring about 12,000 people out of gangs and into regular life these days, and it's a huge, a lot of celebrities shtick for it, and it's a big thing. This friend here on the right, whose picture you just saw, his name is Frankie. And he was our guide as we took a tour of what's called Homeboy Industries. Frankie was incredible to me. Whenever he was 5 years old, his older brother, who was in a gang, was killed by some other gang members. And so at the age of 5, he decided, I can't wait to get in a gang. Because when I'm old enough and I can join, then I'm going to go and I'm going to get revenge for these people who stole my brother from me. So when he was 13 years old, he joined a gang. Not too long into that, he learned that the people who killed his brother had died the same night. And so he's thinking, well, gosh, what do I do? That's the whole reason I'm in this life. But by then, his best friend got shot, and those people got put in prison, and then he was shooting people, and then it became this whole thing, and he just kind of got sucked in, as The Godfather, shows so brilliantly. He got sucked into that life. He got shot once and went to juvenile detention. He got shot a second time. That's the one that put him in the wheelchair. And his spine, just doesn't work the way it's supposed to anymore. He went to juvenile prison at that point. He got out, and at this point, he's thinking, what do I have to live for anymore? I'm in a wheelchair. I'm 16 years old. So then he really went wild, and his house was a headquarters for their gang by this point. He got shot again while he's in a wheelchair. That's the one that landed him in prison, and because he was shooting as well. And so he was in prison for over a year. The thing is, Father Greg, the very first time he went into juvie, Father Greg came and visited him and said, hey, when you're ready to be good, you come and find me and I'll be here for you. And Frankie just kind of laughed him off at that point. But his experience in prison made him realize he didn't want this life for the rest of his life. And so when he got out, he found Father Greg. Now, this had been over 5 years, 8 years. And he walks into Homeboy Industries, and Father Greg says, I've met you before, haven't I? And again, he's 12,000 people a year, and he could remember this kid's face. And it was before the wheelchair when he met him. And And he said, "Are you ready to be good?" And Frankie said, "Yeah, I'm ready to be good." And he has been at Homeboy Industries for over a year. He was super excited about the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, this was 3 or 4 weeks ago. And we said, "Frankie, why do you care about the Chiefs? You live in LA." And he kind of looks embarrassed with a red face, and he goes, "Because my gang was the Chiefs." And so I've loved them since I was little. Um, and anyway, Frankie was accepted into their program, so he has been taking all these classes. And he's allowed to take any classes he wants. He's graduated from the anger management, from grief counseling, from all these kinds of things. And he's taking a parenting class. And we said, "Frankie, do you have kids?" And he said, "No, I don't have kids." And we said, "Why are you taking a parenting class?" And he said, "Because I might one day, and I want to be ready to be a good parent to them." And it's the fact that the leader of his gang turned around and started inviting Frankie to church that eventually led to him having a saving relationship with Christ, and that has brought him here to Homeboy Industries. And here's my point. Whenever we were talking to Frankie, he talked about his best friend, who got shot and killed. And he said his killers they're scheduled to get out of prison next year. And I cannot wait because I'm going to be here to help them. And there are over 300 gangs in LA, and they all, the people who have been kind of like the carnage of that, are found in this one building. These are people who used to be shooting at each other, who have killed each other's loved ones, and now they have jobs together. They've built businesses that employ these folks, and they see each other daily, and they pray for each other, and they sing each other happy birthday. And I was just so impressed with Frankie. And as a pastor, I'll admit, I have strong feelings about good and bad ways to think about God. I disagree with people like Joel Osteen, for example, about the place of wealth when it comes to faith. But you know what? I don't know Joel Osteen, and if people get close to God through his church, then wonderful, that's amazing. Why do I care? But you come in a little closer, and I disagree with some Methodist churches about the fact that they won't baptize infants. And that bothers me a little bit more because it's a little more personal to me because I'm a Methodist pastor. But you know what? I don't go to their church, and if people are meeting Jesus through that, then whatever. But then you come in a little closer. I disagree with things that I see people who are dear to me post on social media. And that bothers me more because I'm like, I know you, and I know that you're a lovely person, and apparently we really disagree on this, right? And then that occupies a little bit more space in my mind, but the hardest is within your own family when you have vastly different perspectives and disagreements. And every step closer in, the harder and harder it becomes for us to tolerate the source of division, right? But Frankie and these guys and gals were shooting each other. And they have figured out how to stick together and love one another. And our ability to be one house, undivided, here as a church is not about everybody agreeing on all the issues or based on us agreeing with every piece of Methodist theology. Our ability to be an undivided house isn't even about how this person doesn't live up to what it means to be a true Christian or how they've hurt us in the past. It's about our shared relationship first. The way that each one of us are like a spoke in a wheel whose center is Christ. Our foundational relationship is not to each other. It's the fact that we are all rooted in Christ. And that is a foundation that cannot be shaken. In our families, in our workplaces, in our country, in our church, divisions will rise. It is inevitable. But a division does not have to ever result in an amputation. It does not have to lead to a split, to the end of a relationship, and do not let anyone tell you otherwise. The cross reverses the wisdom of the world. The cross heals. The cross charts new territory. The cross lifts us all up. So when you find yourself wondering, do I measure up? There is no measuring of any value. That is a completely fruitless exercise. As Father Greg says, you are exactly what God had in mind when he made you. You are exactly what God had in mind when he made you. And so is every other person. And as we seek to be one undivided house, let's give up measuring one another and ourselves. Let's instead measure the cross. Let's brag about the cross. Let's boast about the cross. And let everything else fade and flatten into its rightful place. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.